November 14th, 1910. The chill of dawn hangs over the deck of the light cruiser USS Birmingham. A single biplane rests on the steel, its canvas wings trembling in the cold wind. Sailors huddle in thick coats, breath rising in misty clouds, eyes fixed on the fragile craft. Engines whine, then roar, and the plane lifts off, skimming over the calm Atlantic. It is a small, unremarkable moment, but one that will reshape naval warfare forever. 2 months later, on USS Pennsylvania, the first arrested landing occurs. A wire catches the aircraft, jerking it to a stop. Sailors leap back, hearts pounding. The world watches a delicate ballet of man, machine, and metal. Mist, fog, and the tang of salt spray cling to the steel deck. Every landing carries risk, a misjudged angle, a snapped wire, and death waits patiently. From these early experiments, American naval aviation is born, fragile, dangerous, pioneering. Over the decades, decks will grow longer, flight operations faster, and aircraft heavier. Fires will rage. Rockets will explode. Men will fall. Yet the carriers will endure, adapting, evolving, and shaping the very nature of modern naval combat. The flight deck, the world's most dangerous workplace, will become a stage for ingenuity, courage, and relentless progress. This is the story of how aircraft carriers became the centerpiece of naval power, and how every design choice, every innovation, was forged in risk, trial, and fire. The story of American aircraft carriers begins with experimentation, not certainty. In 1910, the U.S. Navy had only begun to imagine the possibilities of aircraft at sea. Launching a fragile biplane from a cruiser or resting on a wooden deck was a leap of faith, one that would test pilots, sailors, and naval engineering alike. By 1922, the Navy had transformed a collier, USS Jupiter, into the first true U.S. aircraft carrier, rechristened USS Langley. At 542 feet in length, Langley featured a flush deck and retractable funnels, a design that allowed engineers to experiment freely. The ship's purpose was simple but perilous: develop doctrine, test landing systems, and figure out how to operate aircraft at sea. Landing accidents were frequent. Pilots smashed into instrument panels, engines stalled, propellers fouled. Injuries and fatalities were common, yet every failure provided lessons. Early arresting systems relied on suspended sandbags, crude and unforgiving, creating what pilots called instrument phase, moments when a pilot's own instruments became a hazard. By the 1930s, hydraulic cylinder arresting gear replaced these weight-based systems, allowing heavier aircraft to land at higher speeds. Experience aboard Langley laid the groundwork for the next generation, the Lexington-class carriers. Originally laid down as battle cruisers, USS Lexington and USS Saratoga were converted mid-construction into carriers with top speeds up to 35 knots, hangars tall enough to accommodate multiple aircraft layers, and flight decks approaching 900 feet. These ships introduced the island superstructure on the starboard side, a necessary compromise. While creating turbulence and reducing deck space, the island redirected exhaust away from the deck, improved navigation, and allowed for better command and control. The first tests of large-scale carrier operations were dramatic. Exercises in the interwar years, such as Fleet Problem X in the Pacific, revealed both strengths and weaknesses. Aircraft could strike far beyond battleship range, but coordination, launch timing, and deck safety remained delicate. Lexington and Saratoga could carry roughly 90 aircraft, but mishaps were frequent. Pilots learned to correct for torque-induced port swings during takeoffs. Flight crews coordinated elevators and catapults, and deck crews mastered the choreography of fueling, arming, and moving planes across narrow spaces. Carriers were still experimental, yet lessons multiplied rapidly. Each deck mishap, each lost aircraft, each fire on board prompted design revisions. As aircraft grew faster and heavier, decks were extended, hangars reinforced, and arresting gear improved. Catapults, first rare, became essential for launching increasingly powerful aircraft. The Navy realized that the success of a carrier did not depend solely on the ship or the aircraft. It depended on the seamless integration of both, alongside well-trained crews executing a carefully choreographed ballet on steel, wood, and oil-stained decks. By the mid-1930s, the U.S. Navy had achieved a fragile mastery. USS Langley had trained a generation of pilots. Lexington-class carriers proved that large, fast ships could operate dozens of aircraft simultaneously. But these designs were still constrained by treaties and budgets, limiting armor, speed, and deck space. Despite these constraints, naval thinkers recognized that the carrier was no longer a curiosity. It was a central weapon of modern naval warfare, capable of projecting power across oceans, striking distant targets, and redefining naval strategy forever. By the late 1930s, American aircraft carrier design had moved from experimentation to purpose-built platforms. USS Ranger, laid down in 1931, was the first ship designed from the keel up as a carrier. Though relatively small at 14,000 tons and limited by the Washington Naval Treaty, Ranger introduced innovations such as weapon elevators, critical for moving aircraft efficiently between hangars and the flight deck. Yet, even as a purpose-built carrier, she was slower than desired, missing the speed required for operations in the vast Pacific. Her deployments were limited to the Atlantic, leaving the Pacific to be dominated by more capable ships. The following Yorktown-class carriers, Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet, marked a turning point. With larger hangars, higher speeds, and additional elevators, these ships were designed to operate more aircraft with faster turnaround. WASP, a single-ship class, introduced the deck-edge elevator concept, an innovation that expanded flight deck space while keeping operational efficiency intact. These carriers became central to the Navy's growing doctrine of carrier-based power projection. The lessons of the Lexington and Saratoga classes informed every aspect of this new generation. Deck operations were no longer ad hoc. Every plane launch and recovery was coordinated through color-coded crew roles, signal officers, and evolving arresting gear. The flight deck itself became a battlefield in miniature, wooden and unarmored, vulnerable to bombs, torpedoes, and accidents alike. WASP's lack of armor would prove fatal in combat, highlighting the necessity of integrating protection into carrier design without compromising operational speed or aircraft capacity. As the Pacific War approached, Essex-class carriers emerged as the U.S. Navy's backbone. These ships were larger, faster, and better armored than their predecessors. A 2.5-inch hangar deck allowed them to absorb bomb and kamikaze strikes that would have destroyed earlier carriers. The Essex class could carry more aircraft and withstand more punishment, a combination that proved decisive in battles such as Leyte Gulf and the Philippine Sea. Crew training emphasized damage control, firefighting, and rapid aircraft turnaround, a recognition that survival depended as much on human skill as on steel. Even the layout of hangars and elevators evolved. Deck-edge elevators and larger hangars enabled simultaneous operations on multiple levels. Lessons from early carrier fires and landing accidents informed safer procedures, from improved arresting gear to barrier wires for emergency stops. Each innovation was a response to hard-won experience. Pilot injuries, aircraft loss, and catastrophic fires had shaped the Navy's understanding of risk. By the time war broke out, American carriers were not only floating air bases. They were laboratories of operational efficiency, integrating ship design, aircraft capability, and human coordination in a deadly, precise choreography. Naval aviation had matured into a strategic weapon. Carriers could strike far beyond the range of battleships, project force across vast oceans, and redefine naval engagements. These ships were complex ecosystems. Armored decks, catapults, arresting gear, elevators, and carefully trained crews worked in unison to launch and recover aircraft under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. The Pacific would test these systems to their limits. The early interwar experiments, the crashes, injuries, and design failures, had paid off in a fleet capable of decisive, sustained operations against the Japanese Navy. By 1941, as war loomed on both sides of the Pacific, American carriers stood ready. The lessons learned from Langley, Lexington-class trials, and the interwar exercises had matured into doctrine, tactics, and engineering. Every design choice, from armored decks to elevator placement, reflected decades of accumulated knowledge. The stage was set for a new era of naval warfare, one in which the carrier, not the battleship, would dominate. And as the first shots of the Pacific War approached, the U.S. Navy's carriers would prove that every innovation, every risk, and every lesson had a purpose. The flight deck of an aircraft carrier is a place where danger and routine collide in a perpetual dance. Sailors and aviators live and breathe a constant tension. Every takeoff, every landing carries the potential for catastrophe. In the early carriers of the 1930s and 1940s, this danger was amplified by primitive arresting gear and wooden decks. Men were trained to move with precision, yet even the most disciplined crew could not fully control the chaos of high-speed aircraft landing in tight quarters. Consider a pilot in the cockpit of a Grumman F-4F Wildcat or a TBD Devastator. His plane hurtles toward the deck at 70 to 100 miles per hour, wings wobbly in gusts of wind, engines screaming, eyes fixed on a thin wire that must stop the aircraft within seconds. Below, deck crew move like clockwork. Yellow shirt officers direct movement, blue shirt tractor drivers shift aircraft, and red shirt ordnance teams stand ready for fire or crash. Every man knows that a single misstep, a missed signal, a slipped wire, can cost a life. Injuries were common, and fatalities not rare. Early carrier operations left pilots with broken noses, shattered teeth, and worse. Yet the sailors accepted the risk, understanding that the efficiency of the carrier depended on precise human coordination. The shared tension created a unique bond, a camaraderie forged in fire and smoke. Life on the deck demanded vigilance, courage, and an almost preternatural awareness of machines and men moving at lethal speed. Human error remained the primary cause of accidents, and as carriers grew larger and aircraft faster, the margin for error became vanishingly small. Tactical perspective, carrier as a floating airbase. From a tactical standpoint, the aircraft carrier redefined naval warfare. No longer confined to the coast or dependent on island bases, a carrier could strike anywhere within its aircraft's operational radius. Early exercises during the interwar period, so-called fleet problems, tested this concept rigorously. In Fleet Problem 10, USS Saratoga detached from the main fleet, launching a surprise dive-bombing attack against the Panama Canal at dawn. The operation demonstrated the carrier's ability to project power beyond the horizon, bypassing traditional battleships and coastal defenses. The Yorktown and Essex-class carriers would take these lessons to war. Aircraft could be launched to attack enemy ships, supply lines, or airfields hundreds of miles away. The flight deck became a tactical node where coordination, timing, and speed determined victory. Every maneuver, catapult launch, deck rotation, recovery, was part of a carefully choreographed sequence, executed under the constant pressure of enemy threat. Even the placement of the island, the number and size of elevators, and the positioning of arresting gear had tactical implications, shaping how the carrier could operate in high-stakes battles. The carrier's tactical value was amplified by the synergy between air and sea power. Battleships no longer dominated the oceans. Carriers could outmaneuver, outstrike, and outlast them. Japanese pilots at Pearl Harbor would soon learn the destructive potential of this new form of warfare. For commanders, the challenge was both logistical and strategic, ensuring that aircraft, fuel, munitions, and personnel were synchronized to maximize offensive and defensive effectiveness. In essence, the carrier became a floating command center, its success hinging on human skill, mechanical reliability, and tactical foresight. The aircraft carrier is a machine of remarkable engineering, a floating city designed to launch and recover aircraft under extreme conditions. Technology dictated the pace, efficiency, and safety of flight deck operations. Early carriers like USS Langley featured wooden flush decks and rudimentary, weight-based arresting gear. Pilots learned the hard way. The instrument phase, left faces smashed against panels. Sandbags did little to absorb kinetic energy, and accidents were frequent. These early experiments were crude, yet essential. By the 1930s, hydraulic arresting gear replaced sandbags, enabling heavier aircraft to land at higher speeds. Deck-edge elevators and island superstructures optimized flight operations, directing exhaust plumes and increasing deck space. Each innovation was tested under fire, sometimes literally. USS Lexington and USS Saratoga carried out exercises that stressed new systems to their limits, from deck handling to aircraft storage, demonstrating the delicate balance of weight, speed, and space. World War II pushed technology further. Essex-class carriers introduced armored hangars, torpedo protection, and improved elevators to accommodate larger aircraft. Steam catapults revolutionized launch operations in the jet age, providing consistent acceleration for heavier, faster aircraft. Optical landing systems, OLS, and landing signal officers worked in tandem, reducing accident rates and allowing simultaneous launch and recovery, a feat impossible with early carriers. The transition to nuclear power with USS Enterprise multiplied energy availability, enabling greater operational endurance and advanced systems integration. Even minor technical refinements had outsized impact. Flight deck layouts evolved to minimize hazards. Emergency barricades were installed to catch failed landings, and electromagnetic catapults reduced stress on airframes while increasing sortie rates. Each technological innovation responded directly to human limitations and tactical demands, illustrating a constant dialogue between men and machines in the unforgiving environment of carrier aviation. Leadership perspective, commanding the floating fortress. Commanding an aircraft carrier requires more than strategic vision. It demands micro-level coordination, psychological insight, and decisive action under pressure. Admirals and captains orchestrated the movements of hundreds of crew members and aircraft simultaneously. The complexity of operations meant that leadership errors could cascade into disaster. During World War II, commanders like Admiral Ernest King and Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher demonstrated how decisive leadership could amplify a carrier's tactical advantage. Mitcher's work with Task Force 58 in the Pacific emphasized speed, coordination, and audacity, turning carriers into mobile airbases capable of projecting power across thousands of miles. Decisions on launch timing, deck rotation, and strike sequencing required both intuition and precise calculation. Leadership was also a human challenge. Pilots needed confidence in their commander's decisions, while deck crews relied on clear instructions to survive the inherent dangers of the flight deck. After-action reports from incidents like the USS Forrestal Fire of 1967 or the USS Enterprise deck explosion in 1969 highlighted the importance of rapid decision-making, communication, and procedural discipline. Leaders implemented rigorous safety protocols, organized firefighting teams, and coordinated crisis responses. Furthermore, forward-looking leadership shaped future design. Decisions to adopt angled decks, deck-edge elevators, and advanced catapults were informed not just by engineering, but by commanders' understanding of operational needs. The best leaders were those who bridged the gap between human capability, technological possibility, and strategic necessity, ensuring that every aircraft carrier was both an effective weapon and a survivable environment for its crew. June 4, 1942. The Pacific dawn breaks over the coral atolls of Midway. Mist rolls off the lagoon, clinging to the silhouettes of American carriers. USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, USS Yorktown, anchored in tense anticipation. Radar pings echo faintly through the steel corridors. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu move with deadly precision, their decks lined with dive bombers and torpedo planes. Task Force 16 and 17 are outnumbered. USS Yorktown, recently repaired after the Coral Sea, groans under the weight of hastily trained pilots and aircraft rushed back into service. Every man knows that survival hinges on timing, coordination, and sheer nerve. Flight deck crews move with a choreography born of endless drills. Yellow shirt officers guide aircraft into position. Green shirt catapult crews brace. Blue shirt tractor drivers push planes into launch spots. Brown shirt plane captains inspect undercarriages in the shadow of early morning fog. At 7:30, the first planes launch. TBD, Devastators roar off the decks of Enterprise and Hornet, their engines trembling against the wooden flight decks. Pilots clutch their throttles, eyes scanning for enemy ships, while arresting wires, still crude by modern standards, hold the decks together behind them. Seconds stretch like hours. The technology that had been painstakingly refined, arresting gear, catapults, signaling systems, becomes the thin line between life and death. Midway skies ignite as Japanese bombers approach. Dive after dive, torpedo after torpedo, the carriers dodge destruction by inches. Leadership at every level is tested. Mitcher's orders ripple through the task force, relayed by signal flags, radios, and officers sprinting across steel decks. Pilots maneuver through smoke and anti-aircraft fire. Deck crews brace for planes returning crippled from combat, knowing that a single misstep could trigger catastrophe. USS Yorktown becomes the epicenter of the storm. A Japanese bomb strikes amidships, tearing through hangars, igniting fuel, and shattering steel. Crews leap into action, fire hoses in hand, battling the inferno. Within minutes, the carrier lists, yet operations continue. Planes still take off, engines screaming, their pilots guided by experienced LSOs signaling through colored paddles and wands. The choreography of destruction and survival unfolds like a grim ballet. Amidst the chaos, technology proves decisive. Radar detects incoming squadrons before they are visible, allowing fighter cover to intercept. Arresting gear snatches returning planes from the brink of disaster. Damage control parties patch holes, isolate fires, and keep power running. Every lesson learned from Langley, Lexington, and Saratoga, wooden decks, weight-based arresting, experimental islands, finds its purpose here, tested against the harshest reality. By afternoon, the tide begins to shift. American dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown locate the Japanese carriers. Precision strikes ignite fuel tanks and ammunition stores aboard Akagi and Kaga. Smoke rises like black columns into the sky, obscuring the sun. In this climactic hour, human skill, leadership, and technological innovation converge. The previously dominant Japanese fleet is thrown into disarray. But victory is not without cost. USS Yorktown, critically damaged from earlier attacks, finally succumbs to a torpedo strike later that evening. Crews abandon ship, water-consuming steel corridors once alive with purpose. Survivors cling to life rafts, eyes fixed on the distant horizon where Enterprise and Hornet continue to operate. The battle has been won tactically, but the price in blood and material is immense. A stark reminder that even the most advanced carriers and trained crews are fragile against the unforgiving realities of war. This moment, June 4th, 1942, represents more than a battle. It crystallizes the evolution of carrier warfare, technology tested under fire, leadership guiding human courage, and men and machines pushed to their limits. Every innovation, every procedural refinement, every painstakingly trained pilot contributes to the outcome. The Pacific War will continue, but the era of the aircraft carrier as the decisive instrument of naval power is now indisputable. July 29, 1952. The flight deck of USS Antietam trembles beneath the roar of jet engines. The angled deck experiment is underway. A new generation of aircraft, faster, heavier, more powerful than any propeller-driven plane, approaches for recovery. Landing is no longer a simple question of throttles and cables. Pilots now must calculate approach speed, descent angle, and arresting hook engagement, often under the watchful eye of an optical landing system, a gyroscopically stabilized mirror reflecting datum lights, and the amber meatball. Jets streak across the deck, their tail hooks grazing arresting wires inches from spinning propellers of parked aircraft. Barrier wires stand ready, 3 to 4 feet high, prepare to stop any aircraft failing to catch an arrestor cable. Crews move with machine-like precision. Crash teams in red, ordnance handlers in red, plane captains in brown, and catapult crews in green execute simultaneous tasks. Every second counts. Every error is potentially fatal. The lessons of World War II are writ large. Steam catapults, first tested in Philadelphia and on USS Hancock, now launch planes weighing several tons, accelerating them from zero to airborne in mere seconds. This raw power transforms carrier operations, but introduces new dangers. On May 29, 1967, aboard USS Forrestal, a single Zuni rocket, armed and improperly secured, ignites. Flames race across the flight deck, detonating fuel tanks and bombs. Within minutes, a chain reaction erupts. Explosions rip through aircraft, decks, and lives. 134 sailors die, 161 are injured. 2 years later, USS Enterprise faces a similar crisis. A rocket, overheated by a nearby Huffer unit, explodes. Fires spread rapidly, aircraft burn, but damage control parties contain the inferno over 4 hours. 28 sailors perish, 300 are wounded. These tragedies mark a turning point. The Navy implements rigorous ordnance procedures, advanced firefighting techniques, and retrains flight deck crews in the choreography of life and death. Every launch and recovery thereafter bears the imprint of these lessons. The late 1960s usher in the nuclear era. USS Enterprise, Big E, the first nuclear-powered carrier, slices through the Atlantic at over 30 knots. 8 A-2W reactors hum beneath her armored decks, replacing boilers and providing virtually limitless power. The ship carries 90 aircraft, thousands of sailors, and enough fuel and supplies to operate indefinitely without refueling. Her flight deck is a theater of constant movement, jets launched and recovered with military precision, catapults and arresting gear synchronized, optical landing systems guiding each approach with unerring accuracy. Technological evolution continues. USS Forrestal, USS Nimitz, and their successors integrate angled decks, advanced catapults, optical landing systems, and armored flight decks. Crew members, now fewer in number due to automation, coordinate complex operations over decks larger than 5 football fields. One misstep, misread signals, misaligned engines, or delayed brakes could still mean death. Yet the combination of human training, leadership, and engineering ingenuity allows carriers to operate as floating air bases, capable of projecting power across oceans. December 1975. USS Nimitz's flight deck is a ballet of precision. For catapults launch aircraft, for elevators ferry them from hangars below, and crash crews remain vigilant for every possible contingency. LSOs, their eyes fixed on the green datum lights and amber meatball, communicate instant corrections via radio. Arresting gear absorbs the kinetic energy of returning jets. Fuel handlers, ordnance crews, and plane captains synchronize their movements with the speed and precision of a seasoned orchestra. This is the culmination of decades of incremental innovation, each catastrophic lesson from Forrestal and Enterprise encoded into doctrine. The early 21st century brings the Ford-class carriers, the pinnacle of the evolution. Electromagnetic catapults replace steam, arresting gear becomes electromagnetic, flight deck automation reduces personnel, and islands are relocated aft to create a pit stop for rearming and refueling. Every system is designed to reduce turnaround times, increase sorties per day, and minimize risk to crews. Nuclear reactors produce more power than ever before, future-proofing operations against technological demands yet to come. Even in this era, the flight deck remains a crucible. Human skill, situational awareness, and quick decision-making remain as vital as the steel and electronics beneath their feet. The lessons of Langley, Lexington, Midway, Forrestal, and Enterprise resonate through every launch and recovery. Here, Technology and training converge under intense pressure, a testament to centuries of trial, error, and unwavering determination. The story of the aircraft carrier reaches its climactic point not in a single battle, but in the cumulative mastery of technology, human courage, and operational discipline. Every aircraft safely recovered, every sortie launched, every crisis averted. These moments define the apex of carrier evolution. And from these moments flows the next chapter, the aftermath of experience, where design, doctrine, and human resilience shape the carriers that dominate the seas today. The smoke clears. The flight deck, once a chaotic arena of fire, explosions, and miscalculation, becomes a testament to hard-won experience. The tragedies aboard USS Forrestal and Enterprise forced the Navy to confront an uncomfortable truth. The carrier, for all its size and firepower, is only as safe as the people who operate it. In the aftermath, comprehensive changes were implemented across every class of ship. Ordnance handling protocols became stricter, firefighting teams received intensive training, and flight deck choreography was standardized down to the smallest detail. No longer could improvisation cover human error. The introduction of nuclear propulsion on USS Enterprise permanently altered strategic thinking. With nearly unlimited range, carriers were no longer constrained by refueling schedules. They could strike across oceans with unprecedented speed. The U.S. Navy, recognizing the strategic advantage, invested in nuclear power for subsequent supercarriers, ensuring that force projection became global rather than regional. Fuel storage, once a limiting factor for sortie rates, was no longer a bottleneck. Combined with faster catapults, improved arresting gear, and armored flight decks, this enabled carriers to conduct sustained operations in high-threat environments with dramatically reduced vulnerability. Design lessons from World War II also rippled forward. The vulnerability of unarmored flight decks on ships like USS Yorktown and USS Wasp became starkly evident, prompting the adoption of armored hangar decks on the Essex and Midway classes. Catapults evolved from simple hydraulic systems to steam-driven mechanisms, capable of safely launching jets weighing tens of thousands of pounds. Angled flight decks, first tested in the 1950s, allowed simultaneous launch and recovery, reducing the risk of collisions and enabling higher sortie rates. Every design choice, placement of elevators, island configuration, flight deck armor thickness, reflected the scars of past conflicts and the lessons they had imparted. Operational doctrine also transformed. Training now emphasized redundancy, communication, and coordination. Landing signal officers, LSOs, remained critical, even as optical landing systems provided visual cues. Human skill and judgment were recognized as equally important to technological advancement. Crash and salvage teams were positioned strategically. Fuel handlers and ordnance crews followed strict color-coded protocols. Each movement on the deck became part of a precisely choreographed routine, honed over decades of trial and error. The cumulative effect of these innovations was profound. Accident rates dropped dramatically. From the high incidence of injuries and fatalities in the early decades, incidents on modern carriers fell to as low as 30 per 100,000 aircraft recoveries. This reduction was not due to luck or simplification. It was the result of rigorous integration of technology, human skill, and doctrine. Carriers became not only more powerful instruments of war, but safer platforms for the sailors and aviators who operated them. By the 1970s and 1980s, the lessons of history had solidified into a blueprint for the future. The Nimitz-class carriers embodied this philosophy. Nuclear-powered, armored decks, angled flight operations, advanced arresting gear, catapults capable of launching any aircraft in the Navy's arsenal, and sophisticated communications and sensor networks. Every aspect of the ship reflected decades of iterative learning. Catastrophic accidents had been transformed into protocols and design features that prevented recurrence. These developments also influenced global naval strategy. Carrier task forces could now operate independently for extended periods, projecting air power far from home ports. The U.S. Navy's ability to maintain forward presence, respond rapidly to crises, and dominate contested areas became a cornerstone of American military policy. Adversaries observed, adapted, and attempted to replicate these lessons, but the combination of technological mastery, operational discipline, and nuclear endurance remained uniquely American. Even as carriers grew larger, faster, and more complex, the core principle remained unchanged. The flight deck is a crucible where human courage meets mechanical precision. Every innovation, from armored decks to steam catapults, from angled decks to nuclear propulsion, was born from a series of trials, mistakes, and lessons learned at immense cost. The carriers that emerged from this crucible were safer, more capable, and strategically dominant. And from these foundations, the Navy looked forward. The Ford-class carriers, now incorporating electromagnetic catapults, advanced arresting systems, and centralized pit stops, represented the next evolutionary step. Yet each advancement remained tethered to the lessons of the past. Safety, efficiency, and operational effectiveness were inseparable from human skill, discipline, and the hard-earned knowledge of decades of service. The narrative of aircraft carrier evolution thus becomes more than a story of steel and engineering. It is a story of adaptation, resilience, and a relentless pursuit of mastery over a uniquely dangerous environment. The stage is now set to examine the final consequences, both strategic and human, of these innovations, how carriers shape naval power, operational doctrine, and the very nature of modern warfare. The evolution of the aircraft carrier did more than reduce accidents or improve operational efficiency. It fundamentally redefined naval warfare. By the late 20th century, carriers were no longer mere platforms for launching planes. They had become floating air bases, command centers, and symbols of national power. The strategic calculus shifted. No longer did battleships alone dictate sea control. Instead, carriers could project force hundreds of miles from home shores, striking with precision and overwhelming speed. The lessons of the past, catastrophic fires, crashed aircraft, human errors, have been codified into doctrine, design, and training. Every mishap informed the next generation of ships, ensuring that history's tragedies were neither forgotten nor repeated. The Ford-class carriers exemplify the culmination of this evolution. Electromagnetic aircraft launch systems, EMALS, replaced steam catapults, reducing stress on airframes while allowing faster, smoother launches. Advanced arresting gear, AAG, systems absorb the energy of landing aircraft more efficiently, cutting wear and increasing safety. The repositioned island and centralized pit stop design allowed aircraft to be refueled and rearmed without congesting the deck, increasing sortie rates dramatically. Every upgrade addressed vulnerabilities exposed by decades of operational experience: fire hazards, deck congestion, and mechanical failure. In short, the Ford class represented a marriage of technology, human skill, and hard-won operational lessons. The human element remained central. Despite advanced systems, the flight deck continued to be one of the most dangerous workplaces in the world. Crew members, pilots, catapult crews, ordnance handlers, LSOs, and crash teams operated in a tightly choreographed ballet where split-second decisions could mean life or death. Training evolved alongside technology, emphasizing not only technical skill but communication, situational awareness, and adherence to protocols. Historical incidents, from Langley's early crashes to the Forrestal and Enterprise fires, informed modern procedures. In essence, each generation of sailors and aviators inherited the experience of those who had gone before, standing on the shoulders of lessons etched in blood and steel. Beyond operational efficiency, the consequences extended strategically. Carriers allowed the U.S. Navy to maintain global presence, respond quickly to crises, and dominate contested regions without reliance on forward bases. From the Cold War to modern conflicts, aircraft carriers became central to deterrence and power projection. They allowed sustained air operations far from home ports, providing both flexibility and a visible symbol of naval superiority. The integration of nuclear power, advanced sensors, and sophisticated communication networks ensured that carriers could operate independently for months at a time, fundamentally changing the tempo and geography of naval operations. Economic and technological impacts also rippled outward. Building and maintaining these leviathans required advances in shipbuilding, nuclear engineering, electronics, and logistics. Modular construction reduced construction time, while innovations like the MALS catapult and AAG landing systems demanded precision engineering. The scale and complexity of modern carriers spurred innovation across the defense sector, influencing technologies used both at sea and on land. Yet every breakthrough remained grounded in practical necessity, safety, efficiency, and effectiveness on the flight deck. By the early 21st century, the U.S. carrier fleet had become a mature system, with Nimitz-class ships operating alongside the newer Ford-class vessels. Each ship represented the accumulation of nearly a century of lessons, from the fragile wooden decks of Langley to the nuclear-powered, electromagnetically advanced platforms of today. Every design decision, every procedural change, and every technological upgrade reflected the continuous interplay of risk, human skill, and engineering ingenuity. The aftermath of these developments was clear. Aircraft carriers had transcended their early vulnerabilities to become not only safer and more efficient, but strategically indispensable. They were no longer experimental vessels or platforms for trial and error. They were fully realized instruments of modern naval warfare. And yet, the story of adaptation and improvement was far from over. Each carrier carried forward the memory of past accidents, every fire, every miscalculation, serving as a reminder that progress in this arena was never guaranteed. It had to be earned. This comprehensive evolution, spanning over a century, set the stage for reflection. The story of the aircraft carrier is as much about human courage and ingenuity as it is about steel, nuclear reactors, or advanced electronics. It is about how lessons learned in fire and chaos became codified into systems, shaping the future of naval warfare. Standing on the flight deck of a modern aircraft carrier, it is easy to forget the risks that once defined this space. Wood splintered beneath crashing wheels. Rockets ignited too close to fuel tanks. Pilots were thrown into chaos, and sailors learned lessons the hard way. Yet every danger, every mistake, became part of a larger narrative, a story of adaptation, ingenuity, and relentless human determination. From the first tentative launches on USS Langley to the nuclear-powered, electromagnetically enhanced Ford-class carriers, the evolution of the aircraft carrier reflects a century of learning under fire. Each innovation, catapults, arresting gear, armored flight decks, angled decks, optical landing systems, was born of necessity, tested in the crucible of real-world operations, and refined through experience. Human skill remained the constant thread. The pilots, deck crews, LSOs, and engineers whose precision and courage turned fragile experiments into operational dominance. Carriers reshaped naval warfare, allowing nations to project power across oceans, respond to crises instantaneously, and maintain presence in distant theaters. They became symbols of both technological achievement and strategic foresight. But they also remind us of the cost of progress. Lives lost, accidents endured, and lessons written in smoke and steel. Each successive class carried the memory of these sacrifices, embedding safety, efficiency, and adaptability into its very design. Looking forward, the story is far from finished. With each technological leap, from MALS to advanced arresting gear, from nuclear propulsion to automated systems, carriers continue to evolve. The principles remain the same. Human skill, rigorous training, and lessons drawn from history guide innovation. In this way, aircraft carriers are more than machines. They are living testaments to resilience, learning, and vision. As we consider the next 90 years, it is impossible to predict every challenge or every breakthrough. Yet one truth endures. The aircraft carrier, forged in risk and refined through experience, will remain at the heart of naval power. a floating symbol of human ingenuity, courage, and the unyielding drive to master the seas.